My name's Jen Miroff, and on behalf of the Racial Justice Subcommittee of the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, made up of Kathy Leonardson, Pat Costello, Susan Lafredo, Sue McCauley, Bedna Lacombe Haywood, Tracy Brown, and Palma McLaughlin, thank you for joining us today. We are delighted to host Representative Carlos Gonzalez of Springfield, Chair of the Massachusetts Black and Latino Legislative Caucus. Rep. Gonzalez will speak for about 20 minutes, and then our colleague and LWVMA Director, Bedna Lacombe Haywood, will moderate our Q&A session. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat. This is the fourth briefing in our racial justice series. We hosted Rep. Miranda on July 13th, Rep. El Ugardo on August 31st, and on Tuesday we held an education event around qualified immunity. To ground us in our discussion this morning, allow me to share our League positions on racial justice. The League of Women Voters is committed to racial justice at the local, state, and national levels. To quote our LWV US President, Dr. Deborah Ann Turner, we must address the ongoing and inexcusable violence against Black people in our country. We strongly oppose the systemic racism that allows violence like this to occur repeatedly. The League remains an ally to those leading the work, sorry about that, for social justice, and we encourage all leagues to advocate for Black lives and nonviolent protest. At the national level, the LWVUS passed an urgent resolution at National Convention, Racial Justice for Black People and All People of Color, drafted by current director Bedna Lacombe Haywood. The resolution states, first, the League advocates against systemic racism in the justice system and, at a minimum, for preventing excessive force and brutality by law enforcement. We also call for prompt actions by all League members to advocate within every level of government to eradicate systemic racism and the harm that it causes. We recognize that Chair Gonzalez is prohibited from speaking about the inner workings of the Police Reform Bill Conference Committee as they're currently meeting. Based on news reports and our briefing with Rep. El Ugardo, we know that they're working to finalize police reform legislation and that the two main sticking points are qualified immunity and the composition of the Certification Review Board. We welcome Chair Gonzalez to speak about the pre-conference committee history of the police reform bill, as well as next steps for the Black and Latino caucus. What does the future hold for the caucus? What will they be focusing on, and what are their top priorities and why? So with that, Representative Carlos Gonzalez has represented the 10th Hamden District of Springfield since 2014. He serves on the Joint Committee on Community Development and Small Businesses, Joint Committee on Economic Development and Emerging Technologies, Joint Committee on Housing, and Joint Committee on the Judiciary. Welcome, Rep. Gonzalez.
Good morning and welcome to you. Thank you for having me, and I'm delighted to be with such a distinguished group of my colleagues in government as well as activists and your subcommittee dealing with the issues.
Listen, man.
Dealing with the issues that are so important to our communities, particularly our communities of color. I think that for some people will say that we started addressing police reform this year. I tend to disagree. I think police reform has been attempted to be dealt with hundreds of years of actual actions, protests, and sometimes not so situations that have drawn people to the streets, no different than what has happened recently, whether it was in Ferguson or recently happening in our streets here in Boston and throughout Massachusetts. So it's important to know that there's a historical demand, a historical need to address police reform and the institution of policing. We also need to, I think, as we try to attempt to change an institution that for so many years has operated in a specific way, that we have to be concerned with not going towards a road where we disenfranchise our police officers, or look at, we need to also look at ways how we can enhance policing through support and supporting our police officers who do an outstanding job day by day, every day throughout our communities. As you know, on June 2nd, we had a standout in front of the State House of Massachusetts and put forth a 10-point plan. 4 of those issues had to do with state legislation. 4 of those issues had to do with federal legislation. 2 of those issues had to do with municipalities. On the 4 issues which I am more involved with on the state level, one of those issues was to have an independent body review any police misconduct or the use of excessive force. That was an issue that was extremely important to the Black and Latino caucus. And as we led in those efforts, that was a huge and continues to be a priority. In addition to that, we addressed the issue of duty to intervene. When you saw what happened in one of the instances, but some of them we never saw, but always have been, I think, part of it, is the duty to intervene. When officers who swear to hold the oath and for whatever reason see somebody within their ranks that is breaking their oath, fails to intervene, I think he or she should be held as responsible and equally responsible for any actions that happen. In addition to that, we also wanted to address the use of force, because I think it's so important that the laws, the way they are written, basically makes it very difficult within an action of a police officer to address the use of misconduct or the excessive use of force, because it's written into the policies as part of the law enforcement institutions when addressing individuals who refuse to obey commands. So those 3 issues were extremely important to the caucus, as well as the issue to make sure that we address some of the concerns that we've heard on a whether it's a day-by-day basis, but historically, that is basically just right out racist. And actions of some police officers in communities of color have been deemed not only inappropriate, but have been basically just straight out racist actions that are impacting communities of color more so than any other communities. So upon that initiative, I thought it was important as the chair that when addressing any situation that is as complex as police reform, and it's institutionally, in my personal opinion, racist in nature, then we need to include individuals that have different opinions. And we selected to meet with union leaders, police union leaders, and we did so. Obviously, we met with activists who had their opinions to the situation. And we also met with common individuals from the communities of color as well as other communities to get their input and to determine what would be the best. To be honest, I thought it was going to be a little bit more complicated than what we were able to address, sometimes controversial, but agreed with our police unions. And meeting with Larry Calderon and some of the other union leaders for the first time ever in the union hall of the police union hall in Boston with Black and Latino legislators. Historic moment. I found that out after we finished the meeting, but long overdue. So when we started communicating what our issues were and our demands were and our looks at, they were sometimes not different than many of the police unions. They wanted to get rid of bad apples in the police departments. They wanted to address the use of force. They wanted to address misconduct. And in meeting with the chiefs of police, they also agreed that something needed to be done so they can have a little bit more ammunition when they saw somebody that was going to have a negative impact in policing within the communities. So we had everybody sort of on board coming into play. And then we, again, through the legislative process, I think it's important to note that the Black and Latino Caucus never asked for a Democratic answer, a Republican answer, a House answer, or a Senate answer, or a police answer, or a community activist answer. It was a Black and Latino Caucus legislators who were selected and elected by communities, mostly in communities of color, to make sure that the issues that we were hearing in Main Street, in the communities of color, was being addressed. And that's what we selected to do, and that's what we did. And then obviously we had issues came out that were new and different in the common day rhetoric. Qualified immunity was a big issue that came out, and people started talking about that as well as us, and nationally it became part of the conversation. And trying to get a grasp of what qualified immunity, how it impacts policing, and how it impacts other institutions, it was very complicated and continues to be somewhat very complicated. So when that issue came about, that sort of took a life of its own, and the issues of independent body led by civilians became a secondary issue. When duty to intervene, which is extremely important to communities of color, became a life of its own. Lost its thunder. Addressing misconduct and excessive use of force, and outlining what that specifically means and when and how it can or cannot be used. All those issues became secondary to qualified immunity. And then you got other individuals that started to talk about defunding police. When communities of color, if you ask them, are totally not in support of defunding police. They're in support of reforming policing. They're in support of using resources in a better and more appropriate fashion that can help communities of color address issues that brought police reform to the forefront. But I haven't heard a common person in communities of color that I represent ask me to defund the police. So when all this came about, we started, I think, losing some of the thunder of what was being changed and or what was the goal. And again, we had to refocus and recommit and stay true and core to the core of the issues that we wanted to address in police reform. And there are so many other issues that we can address in police reform. But I think whether it's racial justice, social justice, economic injustice, and all the other ills that impact our communities of color, there's potentially opportunity to do that. And there's also different ways of achieving the same goal. Because, and I went by this by basically saying, and then open up whatever questions, basically saying that I think that the most important issue that communities of color need to be addressing and activists need to be helping those communities of color through the communities of color agenda is economic injustice. And that is not taking money from one side and giving it to a different group to achieve the same goals that have failed the system for so many years. It's to really look at it and address the wealth gap is through providing actual resources for home ownership, for ownership of housing units where it can be tenant and landlord owned. That's where the wealth gap is going to be addressed, because in America, until you own a piece of this pie, and what I say pie is some valuable asset, you don't really have a stake in this in America. So we have to help people help themselves be able to self-sustain themselves, and that's through home ownership, business development, business ownership, becoming producers, not only consumers, particularly when it comes to government. All these grants that go out to these agencies to provide services and tell people to go to counseling and tell people to go get a GED and tell people to go this. Well, you know, all those funds are utilized to hire people that don't live in the communities that we're going out to say you need help in achieving financial stability. Well, you know, a youth will better understand with a carrot than a stick, and no different from any communities. If we provide financial assistance for individuals that don't go get a job training, we provide them a stipend or a job opportunity to learn as they go along. That would help more than tell somebody go take a job training without no financial resources during that period of time. And then when they finalize the job training, there's no job for them to go to. So we need to rethink. And I believe that incentive programs that provide incentives for outcomes is the best way to go to achieve financial stability within the communities of color. I went there, and people can feel free to ask questions.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So now we'll turn it over to my colleague Vedna, who will moderate our Q&A. Vedna?
Okay, great. Thank you, Rep. Gonzalez, for actually explaining some of the background in terms of the bill that was presented. And like you, your colleague, Rep. Alaguardo, actually explained also some of the history behind the bill that was presented and some of the attachments that came later. So I wanted to ask a question just regarding that particular bill. So I hear some of that frustration, not only from you, but also from Rep. Alaguardo regarding the attachment of qualified immunity to the bill. And to our knowledge, we understood that specifically when she spoke, some of the months and or years that took just to bring the bill forth. And for all intents and purposes, the bill was ready to land prior to the events that transpired this year in terms of support for it. How can we assist in educating our community or speaking to our legislators that may be sidetracked or blindsided by the weight that qualified immunity brings?
You know, I had some individuals contact me and say, listen, Connecticut passed qualified immunity, why can't we? And I met with the deputy speaker of Connecticut and spoke to some other authors of that bill. Their qualified immunity will not take effect till a year and a half from now. So when we exchange what we did, particularly on the House side, where we qualified immunity will not apply when and if a officer has gone through his due process and has lost certification, he or she cannot use qualified immunity. So when they saw that, they said, I wish you guys had passed your bill prior to us, because at least you have some meat in yours for this period of time. In addition to what we did, at least in the House side, was put in play a commission that will study qualified immunity with the experts. And when and if we finish police reform through the conference committee, hopefully that can start. And we can get some real experts involved and better understand what qualified immunity is, how it impacts not only the law enforcement institution, but how it impacts our teachers, which I have a daughter involved, how it impacts a nurse, that one of my daughters is a nurse, how it impacts a social worker, which one of my daughters is a social worker. So when we look at that realistically, and I, as a social worker in the past, can relate to the concerns that some individuals may have. So if we are not fully equipped to understand, when I met with attorneys on both sides, 3 attorneys from the police union and a few attorneys from supporting qualified immunity, not one side could agree that what qualified immunity really meant to them. So again, I think we needed a little bit more time, and that's what we voted for. And I think the Black and Latino Caucus has gone on record on numerous times stating what their opinion was. We believe that qualified immunity needs to be looked at, and if you get decertified, you will not be allowed to utilize qualified immunity.
Thank you. Also, too, just in recent articles, you talked about that you wanted to concentrate on police standards of training and the importance of the consistency of it throughout the state. Can you expand on that?
First, we've always started with the thought that we should be changing the word police to peace officer. And I think that will have a psychological mindset change in many of our officers, and be able to provide those standards of training that they can not only adhere to, but also be supportive of them, because policing as we know it today, or peace officer as we would like it to be, has to address so many ills in our community, when before it was just crime. But now you have mental health, drug addiction and abuse. You have domestic abuse and violence. And how does somebody that receives a training for 3 months or 4 months, sometimes younger than 22 years old, is able and equipped to deal with all those issues, when it takes psychologists and psychiatrists and nurses and social workers so many years to train to deal with that, and sometimes get it wrong themselves. So we have to understand that policing is very difficult, and that if we provide our peace officers more tools as humanly possible, and continue to demand that they get recertified every 3 years, because that's part of the certification process, that they will continue to be receiving ongoing training and expert advice and information to better address the issues that society obviously is dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
All right, thank you. And I see that it is part of the 10-point plan in terms of it being on the state side, the post. Wonderful. Also, the commission regarding structural racism. And I see your colleague, Mr. Holmes, wanted to establish that. There was an act establishing the Special Commission on Structural Racism. And just, I guess, to speak on who are those participants that they're calling for to be part of this commission? You're muted. You're muted. Rep. Gonzalez, you're muted.
I lost you there on the last piece. You mentioned Rep. Holmes, and who was what?
Sorry, who are they asking in terms of the commission to be part of the commission? In reading the language, it seems specific to the African American community, and just questioning in terms of how people do identify here in the state. It does seem limited. So I guess specific to that commission, who are they asking to be part of that commission?
Well, I think that's still up to interpretation. I know that Rep. Holmes, I think we all understand that a commission will better advise, for not only for short term but for long term changes that we need to see, not only again in law enforcement but in many institutions throughout the state of Massachusetts. And I know Nick Aluguardo kept fighting for the Social Justice Commission, and we have that in at least in one of the bills, part of that. And what we were trying to get about who would be part of that commission, and sometimes a commission could be focused on one specific issue or focus on too many issues and not get the job done as was expected. So right now, part of that is being discussed as part of the reform package. So I can't talk much on it, but I know that if we're going to have a commission look at this issue, we need to have parties no different than when we went about addressing police reform that have disagreements on what racism is and how to look at it from a different perspective. So we need everybody involved as much as possible.
Okay. We do have time for more questions, or just one more question. So I don't know. Jen, do you happen to?
Oh, yes. I think in the chat, well, I actually had two questions. First, one of our members wanted to ask how you personally defined qualified immunity. And also as a follow-up, how are things going? We read in the news about the Springfield Police Department and the investigation with the Department of Justice, like if you can offer any insight there. And yeah, I think that's.
Well, I think as far as Springfield goes, I can't wait till we complete police reform because we need some reforming done in Springfield. And personally, I'm concerned, and I've addressed those concerns with the mayor and have met with him and the commissioner and the attorneys of the Springfield regarding some incidents, and we will continue to address that in Springfield. In the past, whether it's in Springfield or anywhere else, hopefully when we finalize police reform, we will have a prescription to address those concerns, because it'll be an independent body led by, hopefully by, residents in the community and civilians that will be able to look at it from a different lens and be able to address those issues that today we don't have a mechanism in place because it's all being done on the local basis, and in the local basis hasn't given us the results that I think so many people went to the streets to protest on. And regarding qualified immunity, again, it's an issue that I believe has to be addressed. It has to be looked at. How we look at it and how we address it is the concern, and that is part of the conversation again in the police reform bill. So I can't talk more about it, but personally, I think I've been on record in saying that it's an issue that has protected too many bad apples for too many long years. And we need to address that in the institution of law enforcement.
Thank you, Rep. Gonzalez. I have one more question. It's two parts. How can advocates help advocating for other issues beyond police reform, and how do we help moving forward?
One of the things when I started as the chair of the Black and Latino Caucus in February 2 years ago, I initiated a comment or statement. It was that for too long, the Black and Latino community have been supporting many different agendas that were important to our communities. But the agenda was never drafted by them or through them. When it came to police reform and the Black and Latino Caucus, we led that effort. And I think when it comes to economic injustice, we need to lead that effort. And we need to address the continuation of systematic poverty, and we need to address the wealth gap. And it has to come from us, through us, and by us. And we can no longer state a problem, throw money at it, and get the same results, because that is keeping individuals in the same condition that Martin Luther King fought for. And shame on us if we go another 50 years trying to meet the dream of Martin Luther King. It's time. The time is now. The reason why my daughters got an education, because I got an education, and I was able to help them and guide them through the process of pursuing financial independence from government. I grew up on a welfare system, and my mom, with the third grade education, in my eyes, she was a CPA, because she took a welfare check of $400 and took care of our 6 kids and was able to put them all through college and or make sure they got to college. And then at the age of 60, she went and got her GED at the age of 60, just to demonstrate that, you know, education is key. So not one of my kids or one of my siblings has had to acquire government assistance, because of a mom with a third grade education who believed that education starts at home, was able to instill a sense of pride, commitment, and responsibility in her children.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I don't know if we have any more questions. I know that you're short on time with us. I just want to thank you for being part of this this Zoom Q&A with the League of Women Voters. And thank you for being just so candid in terms of your beliefs behind this bill and the things that you stand for in terms of the Black and Latino Caucus. Jen, I don't know if you have anything else to say.
That's it. I'll second that. Thank you so much for your time. We know how busy you are. We really appreciate you, and we're with you and behind you. We want to, as activists and advocates, we want to be there with you and not wait another 50 years, as you said.
Yes,
so thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your leadership and your continued support of not only the Black and Latino Caucus, but many of the initiatives that are important and critical to uplifting a community. And when I say a community, I don't mean the Black and Latino, I mean a community that rises to the top together. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a good day.
Bye.